A millionaire CEO said he never wanted a family, until he saw his ex with twin daughters who had his eyes. David Riley had built his empire brick by brick, not with love or support, but with cold precision and relentless ambition. As the CEO of one of the fastest-growing investment firms on the East Coast, he didn't just manage money, he controlled futures. His days began at 5 in the morning with black coffee and ended sometime after midnight with glowing screens and half-read reports. People admired him. Others feared him. Most didn't dare question his decisions. But there was one decision that lingered in the shadows of his towering success, the night he told Anna Lewis he didn't need a family and walked away without a second thought. It had been 3 years, but the words he threw at her that night still echoed in his memory, though he rarely allowed himself to revisit them. "You're just a distraction," he had said, his voice cold and final. "I don't want a family. I want my life." He had shut the door behind her without knowing that she had stood outside that apartment in tears, a hand resting protectively over her stomach, already knowing what he didn't. He had thrown himself into work after that. New buildings, mergers, international deals. He made headlines not for who he was, but for what he accomplished. His board members praised his discipline, his clients admired his detachment. To them, he was unstoppable. But behind the glass walls of his office, David was a man who had made himself untouchable on purpose. He avoided people who reminded him of what he left behind. He surrounded himself with others who talked about markets and metrics, not memories and missed birthdays. One rainy Monday morning, while reviewing quarterly numbers, his assistant walked in with an envelope. "It came by courier," she said, placing it on his desk. He didn't look up. "Just leave it." Hours later, once the office quieted and the rain outside blurred the skyline into a wash of gray, he opened it. Inside was a short, handwritten note. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know, I'm doing fine. We're doing fine." No signature. No return address. But he recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Anna's. He stared at the words, heart slowing as if the world had momentarily tilted. He hadn't heard from her in 3 years. There had been no calls, no letters, no social media posts. She had disappeared completely, and he hadn't searched. Part of him thought it was better that way. Cleaner. But something about the note unsettled him. Not what it said, but what it didn't. The plural. "We're doing fine." He tried to dismiss it, tried to file it away in the same mental cabinet where he kept all the other things he chose to forget. But it lingered. That night, while lying alone in his high-rise apartment with the city pulsing below him, David Riley, the man who said he needed no one, couldn't sleep. The next morning, he left for a business trip, another city, another speech, another transaction. His team met him at the airport, but as he walked toward the gate, he caught sight of something, or rather, someone, that stopped him dead in his tracks. There, just past the arrivals line, stood Anna. She hadn't seen him yet. She was kneeling down, speaking gently to 2 small girls who clung to either side of her legs. They couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Both had dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and wide, unmistakable blue eyes, the same blue that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. And in that moment, David understood the meaning of the note. He understood everything. The silence. The finality. The girls were his. And he had missed it all. His legs felt heavy as he stepped forward, the crowd moving around him like ghosts. For the first time in years, David Riley wasn't thinking about the market or the deal waiting in his inbox. He was thinking about the 2 daughters he had never met. And the woman he had once told to leave because he believed family had no place in his life. He didn't know it yet, but nothing about his world would ever be the same again. David stood frozen at the edge of the terminal, his pulse hammering in his chest as his eyes locked on the scene before him. It wasn't just the shock of seeing Anna again after 3 years, it was the sudden, undeniable recognition in the features of the 2 little girls at her side. Their hair was the same deep brown as his when he was younger, their blue eyes startlingly familiar, even from a distance. One of them tugged at Anna's dress and whispered something, while the other clung to a pink stuffed animal with a well-worn ear. They were dressed in matching coats and boots, both a little too big, as if handed down or bought in a hurry. They looked up at their mother with the kind of natural, unspoken trust that David had never known, and he felt a slow ache begin to take root in the center of his chest. He could have turned around right then. He could have slipped back into the crowd, boarded his flight, and convinced himself that it was just coincidence. But he didn't. He took a step forward, and then another. His mouth was dry and his mind raced with everything he didn't know how to say. When he was finally within a few feet of them, Anna looked up, and her expression froze. Their eyes met. Her entire body tensed, not with fear, but with preparation. It was clear that she hadn't expected to see him here. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. She stood, instinctively placing a protective hand on each child's shoulder. David swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, but no words came out. The girls stared at him curiously, as children do when they sense something important happening but don't understand it. One of them leaned her head into Anna's hip and whispered again, louder this time. "Mommy, who is that man?" Anna's expression didn't change. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to the girls and gently said, "Why don't you go sit on the bench right there? Mommy will be right here." They hesitated, then obeyed, walking over to a row of seats just a few steps away, close enough to hear if they tried. David stepped closer, but slowly, as if any sudden movement might cause everything to collapse. "Anna," he said quietly, his voice unfamiliar to himself. "Are they?" "Yes," she answered before he could finish. "They're yours." The words landed between them like a thunderclap. He stared at her, struggling to process the sentence, but in his heart he had already known it. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her gaze was steady, but there was a faint tremble in her voice when she answered. "Because you made it very clear you didn't want a family. I wasn't going to beg you to change your mind. I didn't want them to grow up wondering why their father resented them. I thought keeping them away would be kinder than letting them grow up unwanted." "I never," he started, but she cut him off. "You said it, David. I remember the exact words, 'I don't want a family, Anna. I never will.' You said it like it was law. So I left. I had no money, no plan. I stayed with a friend until I could get work. I did what I had to do. And I raised them on my own." There was no hatred in her voice, just exhaustion and something else he couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe. Or disappointment so deep it had turned into detachment. He looked over at the girls again, now playing quietly with the stuffed animal, and felt like an intruder in a life that should have been his all along. "What are their names?" he asked. "Ellie and Clara," she said. "They're 3. Their birthday was last month." He nodded slowly, as if anchoring himself with the facts. "They're beautiful. They're strong," she corrected. "They're kind and smart and stubborn as hell. They've never asked about their dad because I never gave them a reason to think they were missing anything. But I think that's about to change." He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to meet them. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but—" "No, you don't," she said bluntly. "But that's not really the point, is it?" They stood there for a long moment in silence, surrounded by the noise of the airport, the rolling suitcases, the overhead announcements. But everything else had fallen away. David wasn't a CEO anymore. He wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't a powerful man with people waiting to hear his decisions. He was just a stranger to 2 little girls who had no idea how much he had already failed them. Anna glanced at her daughters and sighed. "I'm not saying no. But I'm not saying yes either. You want to meet them? You'll have to do it on their terms. And mine." "I will," he said quickly. Whatever it takes. Then start by showing up without running away, she said. Because they've never seen a man disappear, and I don't plan to let that happen now. He nodded again, this time with something closer to understanding. And as Anna walked back to the girls and knelt down between them, David stayed where he was, not ready to follow, not yet invited in. But for the first time in years, he stood still, not out of indecision, but because something real had rooted him to the spot. He had come to the airport expecting to chase a deal. Instead, he found the life he had walked away from 3 years earlier. And as he watched the two little girls smile at their mother, he knew, deep in a part of himself he had long buried, that nothing in his world would ever be more important than earning the right to be part of theirs. David couldn't focus on anything after that day. The image of the girls, his daughters, stayed with him like an imprint on the back of his eyelids. He cancelled meetings, rescheduled flights, and postponed every task that once seemed urgent. For the first time in his career, he let his personal life take precedence, and it wasn't because he wanted to, it was because he couldn't function otherwise. He spent hours pacing his apartment, staring out at the city skyline that used to represent achievement and clarity, now blurred by the fog of his own guilt and confusion. His mind kept replaying the moment Anna confirmed what he had already guessed. They're yours. 3 years. 3 birthdays. First steps, first words, sleepless nights, scraped knees, storybooks, and soft lullabies, all moments he had missed. He hadn't just failed Anna, he had failed them. Not by leaving, but by not knowing. By being so certain that love and connection were distractions, not gifts. He remembered telling himself at the time that he was choosing freedom, focus, and success. But now, with a deeper ache than he knew possible, he realized he had chosen emptiness. He emailed Anna 2 days later, his message direct but not demanding. I'd like to talk again. On your terms. Her reply came the next morning, short but not cold. Saturday. 2 p.m. At the park near 7th and Lincoln. Come alone. Don't be late. That Saturday, he arrived 10 minutes early. He wore casual clothes that felt unnatural on him, jeans and a soft sweater, but he wanted to seem approachable, less like the man who had once slammed a door shut on everything that mattered. The park was quiet, just a few scattered families, a dog walker, and the occasional couple wandering past the benches. At exactly 2 o'clock, Anna appeared. The twins were with her, each holding one of her hands. They were dressed in matching jackets again, this time in soft yellow, and both wore tiny backpacks covered in cartoon animals. Anna led them toward the playground, and David watched as she helped them climb onto the slide. She didn't greet him right away. She let the girls play. He approached slowly and sat on the opposite end of the bench she had chosen. For several minutes, they said nothing. The silence wasn't hostile, just cautious. Finally, she spoke. They think you're someone I used to work with. I didn't know what else to say. He nodded slowly, staring at the twins with a mixture of awe and grief. They're incredible. They're everything, Anna said simply. And they're happy. I need you to understand that. I didn't raise them to feel like something was missing. I didn't want them growing up feeling abandoned. I don't want to take anything from them, he said, his voice careful. I just want to earn a place in their lives, however that has to happen. Anna looked at him then, her eyes sharp but not unkind. And what does that mean, David? You want to visit once in a while? Send gifts? Pay for school and call it parenting? Because I don't need that. They don't need that. If you're serious, it means consistency. It means sacrifice. It means they come first. Every time. I know I don't have the right to ask you for trust, he said quietly, but I'm asking for the chance to build it. Anna turned back toward the playground. Ellie had fallen in the sand and was now brushing off her hands with exaggerated determination. Clara shouted something about the swing. Their laughter carried through the air, light and uninhibited. They deserve someone who doesn't leave when it gets hard, Anna said. So if you want to be a father, don't start by promising anything. Start by showing up. I will, David said, and for the first time in his adult life, he meant it without doubt or condition. They sat in silence again, and after a while, Anna stood. You can walk us home if you want. But keep your distance. Let me handle them. They're not ready to understand yet. He followed from several steps behind as the girls skipped along the sidewalk, chasing each other and asking for snacks. David kept his hands in his pockets and watched everything, the way Anna reached down instinctively to stop Ellie from running into the street, how Clara whined when her shoelace came undone, how Anna crouched to tie it without missing a beat. He observed with admiration and guilt all tangled into one impossible knot. When they reached the apartment building, Anna turned to him. We'll try this. Slowly. But if you disappear again, even once, you're done. No explanations. No redemption. Understood? Yes, he said. Understood. She nodded, then reached into one of the girls' backpacks and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. This is their weekly schedule. Start small. See what they like. Then maybe you can join us at the library next weekend. He took the paper like it was sacred. She didn't say goodbye, just turned and guided the twins inside. David stood on the sidewalk long after the door shut. The street around him bustled with life, cars, conversations, honking horns, but all he could hear was Clara's giggle echoing in his ears. He had started to realize that redemption wouldn't come with a grand gesture or apology. It would come with every early morning, every walk in the park, every quiet moment he was allowed to witness. And for the first time in his life, David Riley, the man who had sworn he didn't need a family, found himself hoping for nothing more than the chance to finally be one. David spent the next few days studying the paper Anna had handed him as if it were the blueprint to a life he had never known he wanted. It was filled with handwritten notes about the girls' daily routines, what time they usually woke up, which snacks they liked, which books Clara always chose for bedtime, and how Ellie sometimes got scared of loud noises. There was even a small sticky note on the back that read, Library Saturdays 10 a.m. story time, if they're in the mood. It wasn't just information. It was a glimpse into the world he had been locked out of. A map into the hearts of two children he had missed completely. And he knew that if he got even one step wrong, he could lose the fragile thread Anna was offering him. The following Saturday, he arrived at the library at 9:45 a.m., unsure of whether they would come. He stood in the corner near the children's section, pretending to browse books about parenting, though the words didn't register. He was painfully aware of how he stood out among the mothers and fathers who looked like they had always belonged here, laughing easily, crouching beside their toddlers, talking about snacks and potty breaks and favorite puppets. At exactly 10, Anna appeared with Ellie and Clara. Both girls wore matching coats with flower patches and carried small backpacks shaped like animals. Ellie's was a bunny, Clara's was a bear. David's breath caught in his throat at the sight of them. They were chatting to each other, already excited, and Anna held their hands loosely as she scanned the room. When she saw him, her expression didn't soften or tighten. It simply acknowledged him. She gave the slightest nod and walked over. They know your name now, she said in a low voice, not looking at him directly. I told them you were someone special they were going to get to know. Don't push. Don't force anything. David crouched down so he was at eye level as the girls approached. Hi Ellie. Hi Clara, he said gently. They stared at him, unsure but not afraid. Clara tilted her head. You're the guy from the park, she said with certainty, as if identifying a puzzle piece. You followed us home. David smiled, surprised by her sharpness. I did. I wanted to be near you. Ellie stepped behind Anna's leg, watching him from the side. Are you Mommy's friend? David paused. I'm learning how to be. And I hope I can be your friend too. Neither girl responded directly, but they followed Anna into the reading circle. David didn't sit with them but stayed nearby, within view. He watched as the librarian animated the story, using big hand gestures and funny voices, and saw Clara laugh out loud while Ellie rested her cheek against Anna's shoulder, eyes wide and sparkling. After story time, Anna took the girls to pick out books, and to David's surprise, Clara tugged on his sleeve. "Come help me pick a funny one." It was the first time she'd reached for him voluntarily. He followed her to the shelves, crouching beside her while she pulled out one book after another, explaining why each cover was too boring or too babyish. She finally chose one about a talking dog who owned a bakery and proudly handed it to him. "We'll read this next time." Ellie wasn't as quick to warm up, but she didn't avoid him either. When it was time to leave, she looked up and quietly said, "Bye, David." It wasn't much. But it was enough to make his chest tighten with something dangerously close to hope. Anna didn't speak much on the walk back to their apartment, but when they reached the front door, she turned to him. They didn't cry. They didn't resist. That's something. He nodded, unsure what to say that wouldn't sound like begging. But then she added, "There's a park near here. We go sometimes after school on Fridays. We'll be there next week. If you want." "I'll be there," he said immediately, not caring how eager he sounded. That week, he rearranged his entire work schedule to be free Friday afternoon. His assistant raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. For the first time, David left his office in the middle of the day without guilt. He arrived at the park early again, this time bringing a small bag filled with coloring books and crayons. It wasn't much, but it felt like an offering. A beginning. When the girls saw him, Clara ran over without hesitation. Ellie was slower, more observant, but eventually joined them. Anna sat on a nearby bench, watching, silent but present. David sat in the grass with the girls, helping them color. He listened as they argued about which princess had the best dress, and laughed when Clara got purple marker all over her fingers. At one point, Ellie leaned against him briefly, resting her small head on his arm. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to send a surge of emotion through him so strong he had to look away to keep from crying. Later, as they packed up, Anna said quietly, "They're asking questions now. About you. About why you weren't around before." David swallowed hard. "I'll answer whatever they ask. I won't lie." She nodded. "Then you'd better be ready. Because they don't forget anything." That night, David sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by silence that no longer comforted him. He looked at the drawings the girls had given him, scribbles and crooked hearts, and pinned them to his fridge. The silence was no longer emptiness. It was waiting. It was a space slowly being filled by laughter, questions, forgiveness, and maybe, eventually, love. The questions came sooner than David had expected. It started with Clara, who was always the more curious of the two. One quiet afternoon at the park, after he had pushed them both on the swings and handed out apple slices, Clara tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Why didn't you live with us when we were babies?" Her voice wasn't accusing, it was simply full of the direct, innocent honesty only children possessed. Ellie watched closely from her seat on the slide, holding her breath, her wide blue eyes fixed on David as if the shape of his answer could change something fundamental in her world. David felt the weight of that moment press into his chest. Anna had warned him that it would come, but no preparation could make it easier. He crouched down so he was eye level with Clara and spoke carefully, every word measured, not to protect himself, but to protect them. "I didn't know about you," he said quietly. "I didn't know you existed, and that was my fault. I said things to your mommy that made her believe I wouldn't want to know. And she was right to be afraid I might leave. But now I know you, and I'm never going to leave again." Clara blinked at him, seeming to absorb the answer, then reached out and gently touched his face. "You have the same eyes as us." David smiled and nodded. "I noticed that too." Ellie didn't say anything at the time, but when they walked home later, she reached up and took his hand without looking at him, and that quiet gesture felt more powerful than anything she could have said. Over the next few weeks, David became a more permanent presence in their lives. He showed up every Friday at the park, joined them for Saturday story time, and began helping with small weekend errands, grocery runs, trips to the pharmacy, waiting in line at the bakery just to buy the cupcakes Clara liked. Slowly, the girls stopped asking if he was coming and started assuming he would be there. They told him jokes that didn't make sense, showed him their scribbles with pride, and once even tried to put makeup on his face while he was napping on the couch. David let them, laughing through the smears of glitter and lip gloss, because the sound of their giggles was more valuable than any deal he had ever closed. He and Anna still kept things cautious. Their conversations were short, focused on logistics, but they no longer carried the weight of accusation. There was tension, of course, years of resentment and silence didn't disappear overnight, but there was also a growing layer of mutual effort. They were coexisting, parenting, and beginning to rebuild something that didn't have to look like the past. One evening, while the girls were asleep on the couch after a particularly exhausting day at the zoo, Anna sat beside David with 2 mugs of tea. The silence between them was comfortable for the first time in years. She finally spoke, her voice low. "They adore you, you know. I didn't think it would happen so fast. I didn't expect it to feel this normal." David looked down at the twins, one sprawled across a pillow, the other still clutching a stuffed penguin, and felt something unfamiliar, peace. "Neither did I," he said. "I don't deserve how easily they forgive." Anna took a sip of tea, her eyes on the girls. "They don't know what you did. They just know how you make them feel now. Kids live in the present, not the past. But that means you have to keep showing up. Every single day." "I will," he said, and meant it more deeply than anything he'd said in his life. "I don't want to miss a second more." She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. "I used to think you'd never be capable of this," she said honestly. "Of caring. Of being selfless. Of not running from love." "I used to think that too," he replied. "I thought ambition and family couldn't live in the same world. I thought needing people made me weak. And now? Now I know I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that if I let someone close enough, they'd see the parts of me I didn't want to admit were broken." Anna didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. She leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes for a moment. The girls stirred slightly in their sleep, and instinctively, both David and Anna reached to adjust their blankets. Their hands brushed. Neither moved away. In that small, quiet moment, something shifted. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't a promise. But it was the soft sound of walls beginning to fall. David left late that night, his heart heavy and full at the same time. When he got home, he stood at the doorway of his apartment and looked at his pristine, cold space. Then he went into the guest room, now filled with toys and extra blankets, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a drawing Clara had made that afternoon. It showed 4 stick figures, all holding hands. Above them, in clumsy letters, she had written, "My family." David touched the paper gently, and for the first time in his life, he realized that family wasn't about what you said you wanted. It was about who you showed up for when it mattered most. The following weeks unfolded with a kind of rhythm David had never known before, one that didn't rely on meetings, deadlines, or boardroom strategy, but on early morning wake-ups, coloring sessions on the floor, small scraped knees, and the warm, soft trust of 2 little girls who were learning to make space for him in their lives. Every moment was still new, still fragile, but the cracks were beginning to fill in. He wasn't perfect. He sometimes brought the wrong snack or forgot that Ellie didn't like loud noises. He had to learn how to braid hair and explain why some cartoons were only for later, even though Clara insisted otherwise. But he tried. And in that trying, something inside him softened. Anna noticed it too. She never said it outright, but David could see it in the way her tone changed when she spoke to him, in the way she no longer double-checked his every move with the girls. She trusted him, slowly, cautiously, but trust was growing, piece by piece, between all of them. He had earned a set of keys to their building. He was invited in without hesitation. The girls now shouted his name when they saw him. Clara liked to climb into his lap and tell long, meandering stories that made no sense but demanded full attention. Ellie often sat beside him during quiet moments, leaning her shoulder into his without saying a word, her presence deliberate and grounding. One Friday evening, Anna invited him to stay for dinner. It was the first time she'd offered without the girls prompting it. They ate spaghetti and meatballs around a cluttered table with mismatched plates and tiny forks, and David felt more at home in that chaos than he ever had in the pristine silence of his penthouse. After the girls went to bed, still giggling from the story he had read them, Anna sat with him on the couch and poured 2 glasses of wine. They talked about parenting and the bizarre things kids said and did. Then the conversation shifted, as it always threatened to do, toward the past. She asked him if he remembered the night they ended. He did. Not because he wanted to, but because it never stopped echoing in his memory. He remembered how cold he had been, how final his words were, and how she had looked at him then, not with anger, but with quiet devastation. "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of being with you. Of failing you. Of becoming someone I didn't know how to be." Anna looked at him for a long time before responding. "You didn't fail me. You failed yourself." Her words didn't carry accusation. They held truth, the kind that pierced and healed at the same time. He nodded, unable to deny it. "I think part of me always knew that walking away wasn't strength. It was fear dressed up as confidence." "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I'm tired of being afraid," he said. "I'm tired of running from love because it doesn't come with guarantees. You and the girls, you scare me in ways that matter. Because I care. And I don't want to go another day pretending I don't." The air between them changed, not suddenly, but like something had shifted enough to be noticed. She didn't move closer, didn't smile or touch his hand, but she didn't pull away either. That was enough. As he left that night, Ellie woke up and stumbled out of her room, sleepy and confused. David crouched down and picked her up, and instead of asking for her mother, she wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "Stay tomorrow." The next morning, he was there before they even woke up. What began as awkward, quiet Saturdays turned into full days spent together, pancake breakfasts, park visits, movie afternoons with popcorn scattered on the couch, and eventually, quiet evenings where all 4 of them sat in the living room, playing board games and laughing like they had always been a family. David bought 2 car seats for his car. He started carrying emergency snacks and extra hair ties in his glove compartment. He began to schedule meetings around ballet classes and school visits. Without realizing it, his calendar became full of things that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with meaning. He didn't talk about work much anymore, not because it wasn't important, but because it didn't define him the way it once had. People at the office noticed. His assistant joked that he had started smiling more, that he even laughed without being prompted. He didn't mind the teasing. He didn't even mind when his board started asking if he was considering stepping back a little. The truth was, he already had. Not because he was burned out, but because for the first time, he had something better to do. One evening, as the girls were falling asleep after a long day in the city, Clara whispered, "You feel like home now." He sat there long after they drifted off, holding on to that sentence like a lifeline. Because no title, no net worth, no company success had ever given him that feeling. Only them. Only this. And somewhere deep inside, David began to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the kind of man they already believed he was. David's routine, once defined by market openings and board meetings, now revolved around juice boxes, nap times, and tiny shoes left by the front door. The more time he spent with Clara and Ellie, the more deeply embedded he became in the details of their lives, the details he had once overlooked in pursuit of success. He had come to know every shade of their moods, every favorite cartoon character, every silly dance they performed in the middle of the living room just to make him laugh. Their laughter became the soundtrack to his days. It wasn't always easy. The girls had tantrums, refused vegetables, got sick, had nightmares, but through it all, David stayed. And that staying became the foundation of something real. Anna had started inviting him more regularly, even asking for help with school registrations, doctor appointments, and last-minute babysitting when her work schedule shifted. She worked long hours as a freelance graphic designer, and David respected how hard she'd fought to hold everything together. He admired her in a way he never had when they were younger, not just for her beauty or her spirit, but for her resilience, her ability to raise 2 children on her own and still find the strength to open the door for him again. One evening, Anna came down with the flu. David offered to take the girls for the weekend, and though she hesitated, clearly struggling with the idea of letting him care for them alone, she eventually agreed. He brought them to his apartment, now fully transformed with tiny beds, stuffed animals, and finger paintings on the refrigerator. He made pancakes that morning, burned the first batch, got syrup in his hair, and accidentally dropped an egg on the floor, but Clara told him he was the best pancake man in the world, and Ellie gave him a sleepy hug that he felt all the way to his bones. That night, while the girls were asleep, David stood in the hallway just outside their room, listening to their soft breathing. The apartment was quiet, not empty, but alive in a way it had never been before. He didn't miss the silence that used to dominate his space. He didn't miss the sterile elegance of his former life. What he felt now was a quiet fullness, a belonging he had never known he needed. The next morning, Anna sent a message, "Thank you. I slept for the first time in days. The girls keep talking about your pancakes." He replied with a picture of the second attempt, still lumpy, still slightly overcooked, but shaped like smiley faces, and a simple message, "We missed you." A few days later, Anna invited him to join them for a parent-child day at the girls' preschool. David wasn't sure what to expect, but when he arrived, Clara ran into his arms without hesitation, shouting to her friends, "My daddy's here." He froze for a second, heart swelling, before wrapping her in a hug that felt like a promise. Ellie was more reserved, but she took his hand as they walked toward the classroom and didn't let go. During the activities, painting, building towers out of blocks, and singing silly songs, David noticed the way other parents looked at them. Some recognized him, a few whispered, clearly aware of who he was. He ignored it. All he cared about was Clara tugging at his sleeve to show him her glitter-covered drawing and Ellie leaning her head on his shoulder during story time. The teacher later told him, "They talk about you all the time now. It's like you've always been here." He smiled, blinking back the unexpected sting in his eyes. After that, things began to shift even more. The girls stopped calling him David. It was Clara who tried it first, hesitantly, like testing out a word. "Daddy, can I have juice?" He had turned to her in surprise, and she'd immediately looked unsure. "Is that okay?" she asked. He nodded, barely able to speak, and pulled her into his arms. "That's more than okay." Ellie followed not long after, whispering it at first, then louder, until it became her new normal. The sound of that word, "Daddy," coming from their lips was enough to erase years of emptiness. Anna noticed too. One night, as they all sat watching a movie together, Clara curled up on David's lap, Ellie nestled under a blanket with her head on Anna's shoulder. Anna looked over at him. Their eyes met, and there was a depth in her gaze that hadn't been there before. Not quite forgiveness, but something near it. She reached out, brushed a stray curl from Ellie's face, and said quietly, "I never thought I'd see this." He responded just as softly, "Neither did I." A few days later, David took the girls out on his own for the first time, to a small amusement park just outside the city. He'd hired security discreetly, made sure everything was safe, but the girls never noticed. They just screamed with joy on the mini roller coaster, begged for cotton candy, and made him ride the spinning teacups 3 times in a row. As they sat on a bench sharing a sticky snack, Clara turned to him and said, "You're not going to leave again, right?" Her voice was light, but the question held weight. David took her small hand in his and looked at both girls. "Never," he said. "I'm here. For always." It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And the truth of it, spoken out loud, felt like something sacred. Something earned. He had once believed that success was measured in profits and power, but now he knew the real success was in that promise. In the trust of a child's hand holding his, believing that he would stay. And in that moment, David Riley knew with absolute certainty that he was no longer just a man trying to be a father, he was one. Completely, unapologetically, and forever. The change didn't come with a dramatic confession or a romantic gesture. It happened slowly, as all meaningful change does, in the quiet ways David and Anna began to look at each other, in the way their conversations grew longer after the girls went to sleep, and in how their laughter returned, not forced or nostalgic, but real and present. Trust, once broken and buried beneath years of silence, had begun to grow again between them. There was no official moment when things turned romantic, no declaration of love whispered under candlelight. But one evening, after putting the girls to bed, Anna sat beside David on the couch and rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't speak, didn't move, just placed his hand over hers, and they sat like that for almost an hour. It was enough. It was everything. By spring, David had started spending entire weekends with the girls. He picked them up from preschool when Anna needed to work. He learned how to do their hair the way they liked it, 2 braids for Clara, a single ponytail with a sparkly clip for Ellie. The girls no longer hesitated when they saw him, they ran to him with open arms, shouting, "Daddy," like it had always been that way. David still had work, his firm didn't disappear, but he had stepped back in a way that shocked his colleagues. He handed off responsibilities, allowed himself to be replaced at the podium, and for the first time in his career, didn't care that someone else was speaking in his place. His board didn't understand at first. They thought he was losing focus, that he might be planning a quiet exit. But what he had found with Anna and the girls wasn't an exit. It was the life he never knew he could build. Anna watched all of it carefully. She didn't rush. She didn't forgive him completely overnight. But slowly, she let him back in. Not because he begged, but because he proved himself again and again through actions, not words. There were still nights when old wounds flared up between them. Arguments about the past surfaced sometimes, sudden and sharp, but they always ended with quiet apologies and long talks in the kitchen over cold tea. The foundation they were building now was real, earned, not promised. One Sunday, after a long day at the beach with the girls, Anna invited David to stay for dinner. They made tacos together while the girls played dress-up in the living room. Anna leaned against the counter and watched him slice vegetables with surprising skill. She smiled, tired but content. "You're not bad at this," she said. He looked up, grinning. "I've been practicing." "That's what makes the difference," she said softly. "You practice. You try." That night, as they cleaned up and the girls fell asleep still wearing mismatched princess dresses, David stood by the doorway, unsure whether to leave or stay. Anna walked over, looked up at him, and said quietly, "You don't have to keep leaving." He didn't answer with words. He stepped closer, wrapped his arms around her, and held her for a long time. She didn't pull away. Weeks later, David sat with the girls on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by building blocks and puzzle pieces. Clara was telling him about her imaginary bakery, and Ellie was drawing a picture of their family. She showed it to him proudly. It had 4 stick figures, 2 tall, 2 small, standing beneath a rainbow. Above it, she had written, "Home." David looked at the drawing and then at his daughters, both of them watching him with matching blue eyes full of love and mischief. He felt a quiet awe fill his chest. Not long ago, he had been a stranger to them. Not long ago, he had been a man running from connection, from responsibility, from the terrifying vulnerability of being needed. Now, he was someone they called when they were scared. Someone who knew how to make them laugh. Someone they trusted to show up, again and again. Later that evening, Anna joined them on the floor. They talked about summer plans, the girls' new obsession with camping, and how they might all take a weekend trip together. It felt ordinary. It felt extraordinary. As night settled around them and the city lights flickered in the distance, David realized that this was the life he had built, not by chasing it, but by slowing down long enough to let it grow. The man who once believed he had no place in a family now knew better. He hadn't lost everything that night he closed the door on Anna years ago, he had paused it. And somehow, impossibly, life had given him the chance to press play again. Not from the beginning, but from the middle, where real stories live. The stories with mistakes and repair, with growth and grace, with joy that is messy and imperfect and unforgettable. David Riley wasn't just a father now. He wasn't just a partner or a man who had made amends. He was a man who finally understood what it meant to love with both hands open, and to stay. In my view, the ending of this story strikes a powerful emotional chord because it doesn't rely on grand gestures or unrealistic resolutions. Instead, it leans into something more human, slow growth, honest effort, and quiet redemption. David's journey isn't about sudden transformation, it's about learning to show up, every day, for the people he once pushed away. That's what makes the conclusion feel earned. What I appreciate most is that the story doesn't pretend forgiveness comes easily or that love automatically returns after betrayal. Anna's caution, the children's gradual trust, and David's humility all reflect the complicated beauty of real healing. By the end, he isn't perfect, but he's present. And sometimes, presence is more powerful than perfection. It's a story about second chances, not the kind that fall into your lap, but the kind you have to build with your bare hands. And in that, it's quietly, deeply hopeful.